Just how does communist ideology manifest in the current political landscape? How did Marx and his followers endeavor to rewrite history? What are some of the major misconceptions people have about socialism and communism, and the end results of these ideologies? What are the origins of Antifa? And what is the purpose of the violence they frequently engage in? And where does political correctness originally come from? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
What is communism? What is socialism? Keep in mind the terms are used mostly interchangeably until Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, 1919. Basically, by the time of Karl Marx, the ideas of socialism were dead. Socialism could not hold up logical debate when it came to sociology and economy. It was dead in terms of any practical application. But what Marx did was took the ideas of socialism, and first off he said that the intellectuals are the bourgeois class and you don't have to debate them because they represent what we're trying to destroy. Two, he created this whole kind of revision of history, which rewrote the entire story of human history as one of oppressor versus oppressed, the struggle against the oppressors, within every facet of social classes. He also talked about how, since he proposed this whole concept of the evolution of civilization. He talked about the five stages of civilization. What was it? Primitive communism, the agrarian society, capitalism, socialism, and communism. Socialism and communism not existing at that time, and capitalism being a very new thing that was coming around with the industrial revolution. Socialism, as we could understand it, is basically the system used to, say, organize society to achieve the goals of communism. Communism is the envisioned goal that it would achieve. But he said, since we can never understand, since we can't imagine what the future will look like, we can't say what communism is. And so you don't need to discuss it. You don't need to debate it. You don't need to bring it up, and you don't need to try to justify it. That in order to see what it looks like, we first need to destroy all pre-existing institutions. We need to wipe everything out, and then we'll see what it looks like. Socialism also, because of that theory, took many different forms, many of which were in conflict with each other. And so you have a lot of socialists who have different ideas on how to reorganize society, how to seize the means of production, how to seize wealth from people, seize the basic freedoms of individuals, and to use that consolidated power to destroy morality, traditions, beliefs, social structures, you name it, right? And communism isn't just an economic theory. It says very clearly, it's in the Communist Manifesto, communism destroys all religion and all morality. It is about destroying all previously existing institutions. And so Marx made it so debate, logical debate, was no longer part of communism. And in fact, you should not engage in logical debate because people who represent these ideas are the part of the bourgeois class to be destroyed. And there are many revisions of that same theory. The Frankfurt School had, what is it called? This whole idea that, what do they call it? Repressive tolerance. That's what it was, right? Repressive tolerance.
Doesn't sound like a real thing to me.
No, it wasn't. So the Frankfurt School came up with this theory that basically you should tolerate. The left can be tolerant, and you can talk about tolerance, but you should not tolerate things that challenge the move towards the goals of communism, because they are, it's the ends justify the means. You don't need to tolerate people who stand against what we're trying to accomplish, and so you label all them fascists or whatever. You don't need to talk with them. You also had Lenin's concept of partisanship, the idea that society should only be divided into two extremes, right? And that you need to choose one side or the other, and there can be no middle ground. And even in the basic ideas of communism, which we could say would be dialectical materialism, there are two different theories. One, Marx took from the Hegelian dialectic the idea that conflict leads forward. In other words, if you believe that society is evolving towards communism, How do you speed up evolution if you're an atheist system? Well, social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. You increase antagonisms. You increase the conflict between different groups of society. You want them to fight each other. You don't want them to talk and debate and get along like you would with traditional dialectics, like the Socratic dialectic. You want people to fight. You want them to compete. You want them to struggle, because that is what creates the struggle, right? The survival of the fittest that advances society towards the goals of communism. And Marx took that and made it into his concept of dialectical materialism, which is based on identify, invert, and eliminate the middle. You can manufacture a communist idea by simply inverting any value in society, any tradition in society, any belief in society, creating movements around the inversion and using it to agitate the incumbent idea.
So that's quite, I don't know if everyone here caught this, but I think you've given us 3 different ways, if I counted correctly, as to why a simple concept that's a factual observation could be attacked immediately without a rational basis. And I think you also started talking about why it is that traditional values are under assault whenever basically socialism is being manifested. Can you go a bit deeper into that?
Well, communism it's not amoral, it is anti-moral. It is a system that doesn't just look to say, we don't believe in anything, whatever, which you could say some forms of liberalism might hold that. I do what I want, you do what you want, I don't care what you say. Funny enough, I'd say a lot of the modern conservatives embody that when it comes to like libertarianism, right? It can be amoral in some sense, but it's a sense of tolerating other people's lifestyles and not treading on them, basically. Communism is anti-moral. It's this idea that I do what I want, and if you don't acknowledge it, if you don't believe in what I want you to believe, then you're the bad guy, right? This goes back to some of I don't know if you want to get into the early origins of communism, but it was based a lot on this whole naturist concept that was really popular during the Enlightenment. And, especially in the French Revolution folks and these guys.
Okay.
It's the idea, it was a belief, right? You have to remember they were rebelling not just against kings, they were rebelling against the Catholic Church. It was an anti-religious rebellion, not just one like in the United States where it was against tyranny, the tyranny of the king. And so it was this idea that man is of nature. And so anything that emerges from human nature is therefore righteous. And so if anything that emerges from human nature is righteous, any desire you have, any whim you have, then anything that restrains that is unrighteous. So morality is evil by their interpretation. It's a morality of immorality, right? Good is evil and evil is good from the traditional standpoint. And this is why in today's society we have it, so that people unknowingly embody that. They think that they are being moral. They think they are fighting for, the oppressed classes when they go and attack people who believe in tradition, when they go and attack people who still believe in, say, religion and traditional values, because they think people having morals that oppose what they want are the ones who are bad.
As you're speaking right now, I'm thinking, probably a lot of people are thinking of Antifa. So how does Antifa fit into this?
Right, Antifa, we can trace it back to pre-Nazi Germany, anti-fascisti action, right? At the time you had 3 different groups. There was the Nazi brown shirts, the Mussolini's black shirts, and you had Antifa, who was acting on behalf of the First International under the Soviet Union.
The communists.
Yeah, they were backed by the Soviets. So the Soviet Union, right, the communists there were backing the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany.
Against the Nazis.
Against the Nazis. Of course, if we want to trace it back, Mussolini and Hitler were both socialists as well, just have a different interpretation on how to achieve it, right? It was the National Socialists, and Mussolini was one of the most popular socialists in Europe before all this. If you read their policies, it was about free health care and fighting against the 1% who Hitler named as the Jewish people, and turning people to struggle against them and uniting them in that struggle. And it's the same basic narrative. They always identify a small portion of society who you say is, they're the source of all your problems, and they're the ones you need to struggle against, and they're the ones we need to take our, stolen money back from to, rebuild our society. Every communist party, every communist system does this, and we see it today with even the Democratic parties. It moves towards socialism with its attacks on, the 1% or, white males and things like this. It's political terrorism. And how does that work? You make examples of people. You want to say, don't state your opinion, don't state your values, because this is what could happen to you. Don't go on the street and protest. Don't go out and call for your rights. Don't send your kids to go, hold a church protest against abortion or something like that, because we will attack you, we will slander you, we will show you on every news outlet in the country, we will make you the enemy, and we will destroy your jobs, your reputation, your families, and so on. They make examples out of people. And it's meant to send a message to the general public, to make them too afraid to stand up for what they believe in and say what they believe in.
What are the long-term implications? We promised we would talk about this. What are the long-term implications of that, if that were to stay?
Let's start with the origins of political correctness. This was 1967, Mao Zedong. And it was during, I think, the Cultural Revolution. And the idea was that if you support the policies of the state, you are politically correct. And if you oppose them, you will be defamed, you will be attacked, you will be killed. It's a political, moral system, and it's one that can change based on political policy, whatever they want to achieve at any given moment. Whether you support the current narrative determines whether or not you're politically correct. And if we look at it now with current politics, there are a lot of things that, in terms of where the left is going, that would have been considered crazy, 20 years ago. That now, if you don't say publicly you support or you choose not to, you're going to get attacked. It's because the policies change. And the way they operate is they like to create policies and different agendas, and they latch those on to, say, different oppressed groups, or the groups that they label as oppressed. And so they say that if you oppose my policy, if you oppose my goals, then you hate these people. Then you represent, everything we're trying to stop. If you don't support the Green New Deal, then you support global warming and the destruction of nature and these things, right? You're labeled as believing in the worst part of what they claim that their thing opposes, even though in very rational terms you can say, well, I don't think it would work. I don't think it makes practical sense. Or my values go against it. It doesn't mean that I hate you, right?
But you're not allowed to say that.
You're not allowed to say that, yeah. Of course, this whole idea of political correctness goes back further. During the French Revolution, they had similar, and of course, communism, as I mentioned, goes back to the French Revolution in terms of the main ideas. They had a similar system under the law of suspects, and they said those who accuse us are themselves accused. If you were even suspected of opposing the party, right? The whole system they had, you would be killed. You'd have your head chopped off in the guillotine.
So, arguably, is it the most capitalist country on earth? I'm not sure, but I'm sure some people would argue that. How is it possible we can apply this system here?
The word capitalism is very badly maligned, and different groups claim to oppose it for different reasons. There's some great writings by a man named Ludwig von Mises. He wrote a great book called Planned Chaos, where he talks about this whole idea that everybody likes to blame things on capitalism, but most of the things they're blaming come from the interventionist systems that are based in socialism. And I think where a lot of millennials get communism wrong or socialism wrong is there was this belief that somehow it gets rid of the greed, it gets rid of the debt systems, which a lot of it comes from the centralized banking programs, which communism advocates also. It doesn't get rid of it. Socialism is what Lenin called the state capitalist monopoly. It's what they called the dictatorship of the proletariat. It is by definition a dictatorship. It is by definition a totalitarian system. And it by definition does not get rid of the massive centralized factories and businesses. It's where the government seizes control of them. By saying that it gets rid of capitalism doesn't mean it gets rid of the parts of capitalism a lot of people don't like. It means it takes those and puts them under state control. And so the average person is just not allowed to engage in it anymore. Communism does not get rid of the things a lot of people believe they oppose. It solidifies them. It makes them permanent in society. And if you talk, we get into the interventionist policies, I have, a lot of modern socialists, they're like, oh, well, government is our greatest protector against oligarchy and these things. Socialism leads to oligarchy in almost every case. Because as soon as you start having government subsidizing different industries, as soon as you have government regulating and creating really tight regulations that make it difficult for businesses to start in different industries, then that's when you have monopoly. That's when you have certain companies that grow so big and can operate with, without needing to make a profit, that individual companies and individual businesses can no longer possibly compete with that.
I want to talk a little bit about how these young people that, we've seen these polls that tell us that a lot of young people, millennials and so forth, are liking socialism, they like some socialist policies and so forth. How has that come about, and how are these anti-capitalist ideologues, so prevalent in our society, or at least that's what we're hearing?
And if you were to ask me, I think a lot of them mean well, but they are misled. They have been educated in a system that tells them that America, that rebrands the entire American story. And they didn't just do this in the United States, they did in all countries where socialism has spread. They turn you against your founding stories. They turn you against the values of your society. They turn you against the beliefs and religions of your society. They tell you that, don't trust anyone over 30. They tell you that your parents and grandparents were part of this old way of thinking that the world is moving away from. They destroyed the family. And so you have a lot of these young kids who grew up in broken homes and never had good role models or, people showing them how to navigate, banks and debt and these kinds of things. We're in a system where a lot of kids have gotten head over heels in college debt. The schools don't care if kids can pay for school or not because the government subsidizes it. Again, the problems a lot of them see were caused by socialism, but they don't understand they were caused by socialism. And they've been fed this entire revisionist story of how society works, of how economies work, of how business works, of how, what values are and even the role of what government should play in society. They no longer understand it. And so when a party comes along and says, we understand you, we want to help you, you've been wronged and you've been taken advantage of, and we want to defend your rights and take back what was taken from you, they align with it. But I believe that if they understood the real story, if they were able to see kind of the true picture of what's been done, I don't think they would support it.
How is it that the education system could teach people things of this nature so thoroughly as you're describing?
There's many factors to it. One was, Fabian society, different Soviet movements, communist movements. Fabian society had this idea of non-violent communist revolution, of infiltrating societies, getting into the newspapers and the intellectual classes and spreading ideas through society. There was the Frankfurt School, right, in Columbia University. It was originally the School of Marxist Studies. And they also spread all this new systems of academia. They have things like critical theory, this entire revisionist history, again, of all of society, of the oppressor against the oppressed. You had Soviet subversion, when during the time of the Soviet Union, right? If you were a member of the Communist Party, it meant that you were loyal to the Soviet Union. They had the first Comintern and so on, which was training individuals to go infiltrate different parts of society, start guerrilla movements and those things.
Here in America, you mean?
In America, yeah. Soviet subversion, ideological subversion, these things. They were intentionally doing this. And so a lot of the education in this country was subverted by these groups. A lot of our institutions were subverted by these groups. And kids were educated, whole generations were educated with these ideas. Their entire concept of history, their entire concept of interactions of humankind is based in socialism and communism. They're not learning anything of value a lot of times. All they're learning is how to struggle. All they're learning is how to fight for the communist movement. And so their entire character is just saturated with this stuff.
Josh, how deep is the Chinese Communist Party of subversion of America right now, in your view?
The Chinese Communist Party represents one of the major forms of subversion in the United States. And I'd say there are probably four major threads of subversion. I'd say our financial system, the residual organizations left over from Soviet subversion, the different movements they started, which kind of took on lives of their own, Fabian Society / Frankfurt School type stuff, and then the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party represents the most organized one. It is one very much in spirit of what we saw during the time of the Soviet Union, only being done in a way that people don't seem to notice, being done in a way that nobody is paying attention to. And it's frightening, and then just pulling no punches. It's a very frightening picture when you see it. There's the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, which they recently folded just into the United Front Department, which basically controls all the Chinese communities in the country and a lot of other countries, Canada, Australia, Europe, you name it. In fact, actually, they're being heavily exposed in Australia. There have been some great reporting in Australia on these organizations. There's the Overseas Chinese Student and Scholars Associations, the OCAO, which are funded by the consulates, controlled by the consulates, and they groom them to enter different parts of our society. I mean, many things. There's the Confucius Institutes getting into our universities. There's overseas investment programs. When you get into the deeper levels of state-directed espionage, you have Project 863 for state-directed theft and competition with key parts of our economy. There's journalists. There's major newspapers in the U.S. running paid propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party,
right?
Under, I think they call it China Watch, right? They have a few different names, yeah. But New York Times is running these paid Chinese inserts, for example, Chinese propaganda, right to your doorstep, basically. And the list goes on and on. The picture of it, the full picture, is frightening. When we talk about China in terms of business, a lot of people think China is a country with free markets and these things, which is totally wrong. Basically, 1989 came about, and what happened in 1989? You had the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you had the Tiananmen Square massacre, right? Communism seemed like it was ending in the world. Chinese students gathered in the streets to call for democracy and change in power. Communism began falling in other parts of the world. The Communist Party massacred these people, right, and kept its system. What they did afterwards, though, is they did the economic reforms. And so basically before that, all companies were under control of the military. They created a new department called the State Council, and the State Council is like the masquerade of a normal government. It's still under control of the Communist Party. And they took all these military-controlled companies and put them under the State Council. It was just a sleight of hand. They didn't change anything. And they allowed for some free market for the average citizen in order to start small businesses and these things. But once you grow to a certain size, well, first off, you're regulated through government policy still. You're still fully under control of government policy. They can still take your company at any time and fold it into one of these big state-run industries. And also, getting promoted in these things ties into the whole political correctness system, because how do you rise in power in any way in a communist society? It's through political correctness. It's through demonstrating adherence to a Communist Party doctrine, which could mean participating in human rights abuses, participating in whatever social movement they have at that time. But they also have it so any company over, say, 50, with more than 50 employees needs to have a Communist Party liaison. If you grow to a certain size, every single person in that company and its leadership need to become Communist Party members. There's no such thing as a free company in China. And then they created different laws. They created things like the National Security Law, which requires, by Chinese law, that all data is secure and controllable. All data needs to be visible by the Communist Party. You cannot have a company and have your data not visible to the CCP. Communism is not just some economic theory. It's not just an economic system. It's something that impacts morality. It's a belief. It's a revision of history. It's a new system of values. And it has had a massive destructive toll on human society since its emergence. Communism, over the last 100 years, has killed somewhere between 100 million and 150 million people. Now, those systems were communist in goal, but socialist in terms of government systems. Socialism is the political system that communism manifests in. Communism is the ideology that guides it and, say, the end goal that they envision. Of course, Black Book of Communism says 100 million. More recent estimates put it at 150 million dead by this ideology. Communism is the system of state slavery. It is not about liberating the people. If it liberates people from anything, they believe that participating in the free market is slavery. They believe that a woman being married is slavery. They believe that children being raised by their parents is slavery. And so if humankind is already enslaved by these traditional values and systems that have always existed, what does it mean? What is the difference between taking that and giving it to the people, putting it under the control of a communist party system? So it doesn't free anyone. It puts them under the control of the state. That is their what they call liberation, right? And I think if people are just told these basic facts and are told how communism warped history, how it totally warped the concepts of the history of our world, how it warped human morality, how it destroyed the family, how it attacks our values and our cultures and our traditions and everything that we believe in, to wipe that out and say it's one of the olds to be destroyed to bring about the goals of communism. I think when people see communism for what it is, they will be horrified by it, they will be disgusted by it, and they will never want to associate with it. But people are not being shown that side of communism. Communism isn't just a normal political system, it's something that has a almost spiritual base to it. And so exposing that side to it, one that you almost never hear about.
Josh, powerful place to finish up. Thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure, thank you.
So the question is, to summarize for the camera here, what is Donald Trump's position on China, and how are we going to emerge out from all of this that we've just been discussing?
Right, so even though I think everything I said is pretty frightening, I should say that I have never been more hopeful. Not just for what's happening with China and the US position on China in terms of where things are heading, but also with this battle in our society right now between freedom and socialism. Because I think that is the real nature of this battle we're seeing right now. It's not a battle of political ideologies. It's a battle between socialist tyranny, the absolute dominance of all of society by socialism, or the ideas of freedom that I think America is based in, and that people, I would hope, can start to remember that, what that means. But you asked about China specifically. So when it came to the Chinese Communist Party, I was not very hopeful that anything could be done, basically. Right now, the Chinese Communist Party's main systems of warfare are based around deception and unconventional tactics. You have the unrestricted warfare doctrine, and you have the three warfares concept: psychological warfare, media warfare, legal warfare. You have this concept that looks at what are the goals of war, and how can we achieve those goals through non-military means. And so it takes every single facet of the society and weaponizes every facet of that society to use them, right, as tools, because it's a communist system that can control everything, to direct them for different goals of the Communist Party. Business, investment, education, all become weapons to achieve those goals. But at the same time, the Chinese Communist Party is not as strong as it appears to be. Internally, you have massive protests against it. Our Chinese edition frequently reports on this. You have millions of people protesting on a regular basis against the Chinese Communist Party. You have the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's main system of control, which is fear, can no longer hold sway over Chinese people. They no longer fear it. You have people who no longer believe in the idea of communism, and the one factor they have left is that the Communist Party can make me wealthy, can make me comfortable.
So just quickly for the audience, which is the bigger threat to America right now, China or Iran?
I would say China is the bigger threat, but Iran is also a major threat. And Iran is a threat in ways that maybe most of us may not be aware. So, of course, when we think of Iranian threats, we think of the Iranian military, we think of nuclear weapons development. The picture that's often overlooked is one that China has a huge part to play in Iran. China has been basically supporting the Iranian regime, and there are different, say, corrupt political policies that have allowed that to take place as well. But one of the biggest things Iran is involved with is subversion and financing terrorist movements around the world. People may not be aware, but Iran has massive influence in Latin America. They have control of political parties in Latin America. If you go into countries like Peru, you have, I think it's Hezbollah has official political parties. They have terrorist training camps in different parts of Latin America. When it comes to the drug trade, of course, we know that they grow all these drugs in the Middle East. But how do they make it to Latin America? How do they make it to America? It goes through these networks, through these subversion, this whole system of subversion, all these different networks. And so you have drug money being used to bribe politicians. You have bribed politicians turning their backs to allow for the drug trade. It is a system that has perpetuated itself. It feeds corruption and then uses corruption to continue corrupting the society. I would say that the major effects of Iran are in the drug trade. It is in the, say, system of international terrorism, and it's in the system of spreading these very radical ideas that are, I'd say, just like communism, also a pretty serious threat to the world.
That sounds incredibly frightening. Why is China a worse threat then?
China's a worse threat because it's not recognized as a threat by too many people, I think. And because its networks of subversion are not being uprooted almost at all right now.
Josh, thank you.